So I want to share some tools for you to get started with. It's to help break down the problem. So today we're talking more about the organizational transition at a fairly high level, and let's basically yeah, I mean, through discussion, I think we can fine tune and polish how we are talking about it as well. So when we approach transition at an organization level, at an organization level, we can think about it from a top-down perspective and also from a bottom-up perspective. So top-down means something like this. You kind of see it as see it probably, I mean, this is what we call the bird's eye view. If an organization has multiple products, multiple services, and sometimes if it's a conglomerate, a combination of these, it can be fairly complex when you look at it from top down. Using, I mean, if you want to have the bird's eye view of the whole organization, that gives a fairly complex picture. A project or a program is something like what we have here. Generally a focused component, fairly manageable. We know what's happening there, and it has its own, I would say, value chain. If it's a product, I mean, a construction is a fairly complex one itself. But on the other hand, we can actually associate a tangible element to it and say, we're talking about these types of resources and this type of product or this type of service. So we got to have that perspective. What I want to basically, my message here is that you can look at it from an organizational perspective, but you cannot call an organization as transition to a circular economy unless all its products and all its services are generally sort of in a progressive path or shows elements of regeneration. So that's a fairly difficult claim to make if you have multiple products and services. So this is the model that we want to share with you. On the left-hand side is the organization, and on the right-hand side is the program or the project. So it kind of gives a process, but also describes some elements that are essentially there. If you think of the organization, we cannot, I mean, at a fairly systemic level, we can't talk about enabling a circular economy unless we enable collaboration, innovation, and learning. So it's at the core. Part of it is because we want to create to create a change in something small in a circular economy, you have to influence a fairly large boundary. So you can't actually change a product that you get and replace that in a product without talking to your supplier and getting your supplier to look at their value chain and without asking them to rethink how they do things. So collaboration is a critical element. Innovation is critical because you always deal with new things. There are a lot of things that are not in the market, or things sometimes you can only visualize and have not been done. So learning and capacity building is an essential part too because of that. So that in an organization acts as a core in the middle. In general, if you think of a fairly high level process, you got to understand where you are in terms of environmental impact, in terms of where you extract resources from, when you sell them, what happens to them. It might be going out of your influence, a boundary of influence, because they might be going to the market as post-consumption products, but what would actually ultimately happen to them? So establishing this baseline in terms of footprint, as well as how much of it is actually regenerated, and what is your reliance on resources at the moment. That picture you need to have at the beginning. In the beginning, the second part is what we call hotspots. This is fairly useful if you have a complex organization. Even if you consider one product, there are some parts where you got to think of a solution because there's either an environmental problem or another driver that drives change. For example, if you're relying on a heavily an extracted material which is becoming scarce, your production, that's a kind of a hotspot. If you have a very highly energy intensive recycling process, if you want to recycle that material, that's a hotspot. So hotspots can be triggered with intensity in resources, energy, scarcity, and a lot of other aspects. It's we have some generic criteria that we can use, but in general, an organization can build their criteria as well. And with that, with the hotspots analysis, if you have your products and services, you have your impacts on the other axis, you will have that some are red, some are green, some are orange. So you pick up areas you want to basically change. And then you go to the project or the program level. So I'll talk about the project and the program level in a bit more detail. But coming back to it, at a very high level, what we do is we challenge the design, we come up with options, alternatives, we qualify them using a sort of another sort of a criteria, whether what might be better, what might look better than the rest. There's a measurement you can undertake when you're sure that this is the line that you want to go. You need for you to think of what would happen if I replace this here. You got to have that integral picture. And the integrated redesign on the right-hand side is the one which gives that. And then finally, when you have that simulated or understood at a fairly detailed level, you can operationalize it in the real world. Now, there's this question that I've been asked, whether do you actually go in a very linear path to try them? Do you do all the planning and detailing it out and simulation, and then go to the industry or then go to operationalize? The answer is no. Sometimes these things happen very iteratively. So the whole cycle, there might be number of cycles you run. You can go to market, or you can basically execute it at a fairly early stage, and get a sense or a feel of what would happen if this goes out as well. It's a process that gives you the steps, but how you approach it from an iterative perspective or in a fair linear perspective, it's for the organization to decide. At the end, you kind of report your progress. This is how we changed or transformed something. So I was talking about this a bit in detail before. The whole idea is that for you to start a transition journey, you got to know where you are. So establishing baseline can come from different types of measurements. It can be, some organizations do organizational carbon footprint analysis, which gives some idea on the global warming potential and the carbon dioxide equivalent at scope 1, 2, 3 level. An organizational life cycle assessment gives a fairly comprehensive picture of the organizational footprint. And it's a sort of an extensive study, but at the same time, it's a more complete study. So establishing baseline can come from knowing the environmental impacts of your products and services. As I said, not only the impact, but your reliance on resources when you produce them, and what would happen to them when they go to the post-consumption or relevant markets. So if you want to include the picture of regeneration into the baseline, you got to map that as well. And the second one is identifying the hotspots. So as an example, one of the organizations we conducted a carbon footprint analysis on, we found out that logistics operation is one of their key hotspots. Like logistics and emissions associated with logistics was like approximately 50 to 60% of what they were sort of emitting. But if you capture the picture of regeneration, where their products end up in the market, is it sort of in terms of whether they are being returned, landfilled, recycled. So that aspect is something you got to top up with the traditional analysis on carbon footprint or life cycle assessment. If you want to capture the extent of regeneration, that has to be considered simultaneously in a hotspot analysis. I'll move on to the next ones. So the picture on the right is what I'm going to move towards now. So challenge design, that's what we are coming to. So for organizations, the drive for transition can come from a number of aspects. It can come from the push to improve or the pull to improve. So push is like, it's a sort of a sense of desperation. You're kind of in a disadvantaged position, or you are trying to minimize a problem or avoid a problem or manage a problem, which can come with high waste generation, inefficiencies, high cost, whatever. So you see kind of a problem that you need to solve. Pull could come from the same things, but you don't have actually an immediate problem to deal with, maybe, but you want to basically be better. So saving costs, saving energy and resources, reducing emissions, exchange resources with another, you kind of see potential improvement that would enhance sometimes financial performance or the way the resources are managed within the organization. Uh, the push to improve, the pull to improve can also come from the desire to radically transform the way you do things. And those are the ones which are more, I would say, effective in a circular economy. So, such as moving to offering services instead of products, uh, having an integrated strategy to save resources, carbon, and costs. And you rely, rather than relying on extracted resources, you rely on urban mining to collect things back and then satisfy some of your resource requirements. So there's pull to improve that could come from different type of initiatives and thinking as well. So in challenging the design, what we think about challenging, what we associate with challenging design is radically and fundamentally questioning, what do we do? Why do we need something? How we do something, and do we need to do it? What is the actual need for a consumer or a buyer? What is the actual fundamental human need we try to satisfy with this one? Are there better management of resources we can anticipate or visualize in fulfilling that need? And that's the type of thinking that are typically useful in transformation, which helps us transition to a circular economy. So challenging design is challenging everything, challenging sourcing, how we are sourcing, challenging production, challenging distribution, challenging consumption, and challenging how end of life management happens in the market, or rather post consumption. So knowing that there are problems with the way things happen now, and accepting and acknowledging and wanting to change that is something that we kind of anticipate when we do an analysis like this. I have an example where we could sort of talk through. If we are to fundamentally challenge something, um, if you take the example of printed paper for reading content, how would you challenge it? So if you ask the questions how, why, and how would you basically what other alternatives would emerge if you think of challenging? You have paper which carries a print, and then we read the content. Any inputs from the participants?
Where are you? Yes.
Yes, Belita?
Yeah, I think I will encourage digital reading using
Yep.
whether it is Kindle or any other means. Say where I work, I think the amount of paper print that we do over the last, I don't know, few years has reduced significantly because they made it kind of difficult so that you don't print, not to pass through that process. One. Second, if you send it to the printer, unless you go and touch your ID to get the print out, it doesn't print. In the past, as soon as you say print, it was printing. And I used to see, piles of papers printed but not collected. So I think that way we can challenge and transform into a digital reading system.
Yeah, excellent. Any other ideas? So here we are trying to, if you kind of think of the features once again, what do we need to see? Our need is to see content. And printed paper is also portable, it can be carried. It's fairly mobile, fairly light. So if you're thinking of like, we want to basically have content to read when we want to read them, and should be able to carry it. That's the idea. So digital devices play a really good role. So I am going to actually, sorry, I should have done this like this. read content for convenience. It's a portable item. It can be permanent or semi-permanent print. So I put 3 options. So traditional paper printed with ink is one. What Belita was just sharing, electronic content carried on a digital device is a second option. I put another option here. Thin sheets made of recyclable plastic and washable ink, which is something we don't do usually. So in that concept, the idea is that you have a fairly durable carrying material, mobile. The content is reused basically. What you use to produce content or other print content is ink. Ink is washed and used. So a fairly durable carrying agent which carries content in a printable, reusable, washable manner. That's another concept which we haven't explored yet, but we can explore basically. So compared to the first one, where at the end of printing, let's say a newspaper, it kind of goes as recycled paper, which is a fairly intensive, chemical intensive recycling process. Paper has fairly chemical intensive recycling process, but in the process of the second one, there's a bit of an imprint, footprint in producing the initial plastic book, but the process of revising the content is if you have an industrial process made for it, of course, it carries less footprint as it seems. So this is what I meant by fundamentally, radically challenging the design of how we are doing things.